Right, so this is where the exciting bit comes in, and I never thought I'd say that about a computer, but actually it's really cool. So what I've done is I brought on the resize file onto my scan and cut, and I sent it into Canvas Workspace. I'm going to show you this way first, so importing it from your machine, and then I'm going to show you how you import it from the USB that's in your computer, so you've got both ways. Because if you don't own a Wi-Fi enabled scan and cut, I don't want you to think that you can't use this, because you can. Right, so first of all, we're going to, this is Canvas Workspace. This is what it looks like when you've opened it up and you've pressed new to get a new project. So I'm going to go into my projects here. And this is the file that I've just sent in from my machine. So I'm going to bring this onto here like this. Okay, so I'm going to just separate all these out. So you've got the cutting file. You've got, oh, it's doubled it up. Let's do that again. That's because I clicked it twice. That's a good start, isn't it? So let's just click this and know that the machine's going to do it instead of being impatient, Melanie, because I do that all the time. So let's separate this out now. So you've got your cutting file. You've then got your detail of your foliage. You've then got your foliage itself. You've then got your cutting file for your rows. And you can see here when we've still got the rows and we've got the detail laid over itself. If I just zoom in a little bit for you, you can see how the detail puts all those little extra lines in. So I'm going to move the roses out of the way, and then I've also got the detail here, okay? So let me just zoom back out again so that you can see everything that we've got. And the pieces that we're going to work with, this is if the resize file I asked Lauren to put on. So if you want to make everything bigger in one go, instead of bringing on each file individually, we did the resize file for you, okay? And then you can split it out. So let me show you what happens. If I just get rid of all this now and I go back to my original file, I can bring this on. While it's selected, I can go to edit and group it, and then I can make all the layers bigger. I wouldn't go much smaller because you'll lose some of the fine detail in your stencil. Some of the lines will go super fine, and although you can get through it with a little blending brush, you don't want to go much smaller. And we've sized them to be roughly about 6 by 6, but then you can make them, of course, you can make them much bigger. So if you want to do that, that's how you will do that part of it. Okay, so I'm going to just pop that in the bin. So that's how you would do your resizing, sending them in from the machine's memory. If you want to do it, bringing it in from your computer, you're going to put your USB into your computer. And then when you open up Canvas, you're going to go to SVG at the top. So we're going to click on that and we're going to go to Choose File. And then when I scroll down here now, you'll see Botanicals and you'll see Complete Compositions. So you're going to click on that. I want the rose composition. So I'm going to double click that, and then that opens up all my files, including my resize files. So you can then go ahead and resize if that's what you want to do. It gives you the foliage detail, the foliage mat, and the foliage. It gives you the roses detail, the roses mat, and the roses. But when you're importing it directly in from a USB in your computer, it's a slightly different process. So if I bring in foliage detail, first of all, and we work methodically, this now is all ungrouped. So you need to just drag a box around that, go to edit and group it. Okay, so just be aware that that's going to happen. If you import your resize files, it doesn't. So I'll show you this bit first, and we'll go back to that. So if I do SVG and choose file, and then I can bring on the foliage mat. Now that's the cutting file, so I can move that out of the way. Then we've got SVG, back to choose file. I just want to show you the different ways of doing it because, like I said earlier, everyone learns differently. So then I can go to edit and group that. So I've then got my foliage. Then I can go back to my SVG and choose file, and I can do the roses detail. And the great thing about cutting your own stencil is you can have it, oh, bear with, undo, didn't group it. You can have it the size that you want it to be, which is lovely. And you can put the flower in the foliage in whichever combination you prefer. So I'm just going to group this one. Then I'm going to go SVG again, go back to choose file, go back to Roses Matte and press OK and bring that over. And then the final one is going to be my roses themselves. And that one I'm also going to group together. So edit and group. So it's entirely up to you which way you want to do it. Okay, so we've now got all our pieces on there perfectly. So I'll show you what happens when you import them. So I'm just going to go to edit and select all and put it in the bin. And this time we're going to go to SVG and choose file, but we're going to choose the resize files. So I'm going to double click on the rose composition and press OK. And this time they're not ungrouped. Oh no, they are ungrouped. Okay, so we've just learnt that. And this is the thing, when you're doing something like this and it's new, there's lots of different ways of using it. So what you would need to do with this is import them in individually, or you can resize it on your scan and cut before you send it in. Okay, so when you send it in from your machine into Canvas Workspace, it doesn't ungroup it. So for example, when I did this before, so when I used this file, the one that I sent from my scan and cut, it's given me all those files, but it hasn't ungrouped them. So think about how you're going to import the files in. Okay, so that's another little learning curve. And when we learn something new, and I'm including myself at the top of this list, when I learn something new, it takes me a while to get used to it. And that's okay. Yeah, that's all right. Doesn't matter how long it takes you, as long as you get to that end result. And actually the journey is quite good, because in that journey, you might find other things that you can do. Happy accidents, I believe they're called. Right, so I'm going to work with this file now, and I'm going to show you how we create our stencil. Okay, so I've got the detail of my foliage, and I've got the foliage mat, and I'm going to line all the foliage stuff over on the right hand side and all the rose stuff over on the left hand side. So I'm just going to drag that over here. I'm not very good with the mouse, can you tell? And then I'm going to drag all my roses pieces separately over here, and then we're going to work our way through. Now, it's a bit of a process. It's not complicated, but you have to do the process in the correct order. All right, so follow along, and like I said, we'll do written instructions so that you can see exactly what we're doing. So I've got the matte layer and I've got the foliage, and we're going to bring both of these into play, because it's okay when we're doing something like the roses where you're putting the flower in the middle of the foliage, but when you come to do something like the sunflower, it will change the cutting file for you. So I'll do the roses first, and then we'll do the sunflower or the lily, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. But the first thing we're going to do is put this directly in the middle of there. So we're going to left click and drag across both parts. We're going to go up to edit at the top and into our alignment section here, and we're going to align it centrally vertically. We're going to go to edit and we're going to align it centrally horizontally. So I now know that those two pieces are directly on top of each other. And then we're going to finish it off by go edit and group. So now I know that I've got this piece here that I'm going to use to create my stencil design. Okay. So then I'm going to bring in my rose mat. Now for the rose mat, you need two of these. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit and go up to cut, copy and paste, and go to this little symbol here and click duplicate. So you've now got two. You're then going to left click and drag both of those, go back up to edit and align these. So align centrally vertically, back up to edit, centrally horizontally, and then we're going to group that. Okay, so we've now got that bit. I'm then going to bring the roses into play. So I'm going to drag those two, go to edit and align centrally vertically, and edit and align centrally horizontally. So I've now got my roses with the matte layer and my foliage with the matte layer, and these two I'm not even going to bring into play because this is the detail. So these are a stencil in their own right that you will cut out and use to add detail to your main stenciled image. So I'm going to bring this one back in, and this is where we start to position and build our composition. So I'm going to take, oh, bear with, undo. There we go. We need to group those together before we move them. So edit and group. Right, so we're now there. So I can now move this and I'm going to position it where I want it to be. And you can zoom in, remember. So you can zoom in so that you can see that you're happy with your composition. And I think I'm going to have it about there. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start ungrouping our layers. So we're going back up to edit and we're going to ungroup. And that's ungrouped the rose detail, or the rose stencil, if you like, the open areas of the rose, and the outside edge. But remember, we had 2 of these outside edges, so we also need to ungroup that. So we're going to go to edit and ungroup that, okay? Then we're going to go to our foliage. Now remember, the outside edge and the foliage are grouped together. So we need to go to edit and ungroup that, and then we're ready to start playing. Now this is the new bit, and I know there will be thousands of you out there when I do this going, well, we know that. I know you know that. I didn't know that. And if I don't know that, there might be other relics out there that don't do computers very often that want to learn this bit. So I want to select the mat of the foliage and one of the matte layers of the flower. Okay, because this is going to create my cutting file. Now it doesn't mean much on the roses, but I'm going to do it anyway to show you. But when we come to something like the lily, it creates a new cutting file for you, which I think is super cool. So I'm going to press Shift on my keyboard and I'm going to click on the, let's just do this, let's get the outside one first. So let's click on the outside layer, then press Shift, then come down and click on your rose outer. So I've now got the outside of the rose and the outside of the foliage selected. Okay. So then I'm going to go up to edit and I'm going to weld those 2 together, which sounds bizarre, but it works because then when I bring this over here, it's created a cutting file. Now I know it looks exactly the same as the original one. That's because our flowers are in the middle. But when you look here, these bits here where the leaves come in, it will have changed it slightly. So that's now your cutting file. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is get to the actual flower itself and move that. So I've clicked on the flower, but it's actually selecting the matte layer because as we've talked about before, until you divide something, all these pieces are sat on top of each other in a pile. Okay, so we need to do something a little bit different with these. So I'm going to go to edit and send that to the back so that I can then access the stencil of the flower and I can move that out of the way because I don't need that now. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to work with this bit here. Okay, so this is the bit that we're going to work with next. So I'm just going to zoom out for a minute so you can see I've got all my pieces building up here. And this is when we're going to go back to our categories. And we're going to click on basic and we're going to bring in a square. And I'm going to drag this square from the bottom left corner so that it's big enough to go around the outside edge. Now don't think that this has to be a certain size for your stencil because you can always go back in and alter this afterwards. So we're not going to worry about this at the moment. And this is the bit that's different to what I've taught you before. So now what we're going to do is we're going to drag a box around the outside edge and the foliage, but not the matte layer. So I've got both of those selected. I'm now going to go to edit and I'm going to divide it. And then it will appear on your screen and it will look like part of it is darker. Okay, so you can see now that I've got the square, I've got 2 layers of foliage because I've divided it. But I haven't moved the bits that are left behind out the way, and I've also got my matte layer. So what I need to do now is select my matte layer and my square. So if I go in here to select my matte layer, it's going to select that leaf because I haven't moved the divided bits out of the way yet. So I'm going to stick with this leaf and I'm going to go back up to the top and press edit, and I'm going to send that to the back. And now when I go into here, hopefully, I should be able to select my square and then I'm going to send that to the back as well, like that. And then I'm going to select in the center, which gives me my matte layer. And then I'm going to press Shift on my keyboard and I'm going to select the square and we're going to weld those together, which sounds really strange because they're not overlapping, but it works, okay? So we're going to go to Edit, and we're going to weld those two together, and it will look quite strange on your screen because it greys out that matte layer. But when I then move that, it's given me my stencil. So now what I'm going to do is get rid of all that because I don't need that bit. So now we've got our foliage stencil without the roses in the middle, so that you're not going to risk getting ink in the floral layer. So that's the bit that you would do first. Then you would bring in your rose design and you would cut that out of a piece of Mylar, and then that as a stencil would go over there and fit in there, and it's really obvious where it goes because all you're doing is looking to make sure you've got an even area all the way around the actual flower itself. So you've then got that. So if you wanted to do both of those as one stencil, you could. So if you're pasting it maybe and then you're going to paint it after. So let's just put this into position like that. So then what you could do is drag those, and you can either group it or divide it, and then you can cut it as one piece. So you've got that option. Then you've got the cutting file, which when you've stenciled it all, is then you're going to scan it in and you're going to position this around it. And you can still make this bigger if you wanted to. So if you wanted to create an offset line and make that slightly bigger, so I want a 1mm, let's get to 1mm outward offset line, you can do that. So I could delete the original off, and that gives me a bigger matte layer, a bigger cutting file, which will then fit perfectly around there. And this is why you need a scanner in a cutting machine, because it makes life a whole lot easier. So you've then got your cutting file in place, and then you've got your detail files that you're going to cut out of your Mylar and then position it over the layers when you've actually stenciled the beginning. So what I would do personally is I would keep that as a cutting file. I would cut that out of one piece of Mylar, and I would then make one stencil that had that on, and let me grab this one, not very good with the mouse, so bear with that there, and then my rose detail this way, like that. So I've got my rose stencil, my rose detail stencil, my foliage detail, and then I've got this as my main stencil. So actually, you're only cutting 2 stencils rather than having lots of them that you're buying just to put a little bit of detail here and there. So that's how you do that bit. And I think that's really, really, really cool that we can do that, and then we can create our own stencils. But what do we do if we wanted to put a different flower in a different foliage? So let's say I wanted to put the roses inside the lily foliage. So let's do that bit. So I'm just going to clear this down, and then we'll come back and I'll teach you how to put any flower in any of the foliage compositions, okay? Practice that a few times first, then come back and watch the next bit, okay? See you in a bit. If you want to see more from Highlight Crafts, make sure you click the like button. Subscribe by clicking the subscribe button below, and click the bell icon to receive notifications of all our future content. You can also click here to see our latest video, or click here to see more videos like this one.